Colorado Territory, 1873. A land where ambition and lawlessness clash beneath towering peaks, and where a father's political power means nothing against the brutal code of the mountains. When Governor James Hollister's daughter disappears into the deadly Sangre de Cristo Range, taken by the infamous Blackwell Gang, her execution seems certain. But in these savage highlands, where ancient tribal paths cross with the violent dreams of men seeking fortune, an unlikely guardian emerges from the shadows. And Cheyenne scout with divided loyalties becomes her only chance for survival in a blood feud that will test the very foundations of the western frontier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silver Falls emerged from the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains like a testament to mankind's relentless ambition. A bustling territorial capital whose grand buildings of stone and timber proclaimed civilization's triumph over wilderness, even as the snow-capped peaks looming above served as a constant reminder of nature's indifferent power. The wide planked streets connected government offices, mercantile establishments, and the newly constructed rail depot that had transformed this former mining camp into Colorado Territory's seat of power. The grandest structure in Silver Falls was the governor's mansion, an imposing three-story edifice of locally quarried granite with tall windows and a columned portico. Its manicured grounds and iron fence stood in stark contrast to the rugged wilderness visible just beyond the town limits. Inside this bastion of authority, Governor James Hollister sat at his massive oak desk, his once commanding frame beginning to yield to the burden of his office. The silver at his temples had spread through his dark hair over 8 difficult years in power, and deep lines marked a face that had once charmed voters across the territory. His weathered hands clenched around the telegram that had arrived moments earlier. He read it for the 4th time, his jaw tightening with each word. "They've struck again," he muttered, dropping the paper onto a stack of similar reports. "4th homestead this month burned to the ground." Across the room, his secretary, Martin Fletcher, a scholarly man whose wire-rimmed spectacles and meticulous attire reflected his orderly mind, shifted uncomfortably at the window. "The Blackwell Gang, sir?" Fletcher asked. Though they both knew the answer, Governor Hollister nodded grimly. The Blackwell Gang had graduated from simple highway robbery to a reign of terror across 3 counties, burning homesteads, rustling livestock, and leaving a trail of bodies. What had begun as criminal mischief had evolved into something far more sinister. 7 dead since February, Hollister said, rising from his chair. And now they're moving closer to settled areas. He crossed to the window where Fletcher stood, gazing out at the town that symbolized his life's work. Hollister had come west as a young lawyer, married into a prominent family, and built his reputation defending mining interests before entering politics. He'd fought for statehood, for the railroad, for the very civilization Silver Falls represented. The Blackwell Gang threatened everything he'd built. "Colonel Harrison assures me the cavalry patrol will intercept them if they continue their current pattern," Fletcher offered, adjusting his spectacles. The door opened after a brief knock, and Catherine Hollister entered the room with purposeful strides. At 23, she possessed her late mother's striking beauty, tall and graceful with chestnut hair and intelligent grey eyes that missed nothing. Unlike most women of her station, she wore a practical riding skirt and boots beneath. Her fine jacket, her hair simply braided rather than elaborately arranged. "Father," she said, removing her gloves, "Mr. Winters from the Territorial Commission says the medicine shipment for Fort Laramie has been delayed again. The Cheyenne at the reservation are desperate." Her voice carried the refined Eastern accent of her Philadelphia education, but tempered with the direct manner of the frontier. Governor Hollister sighed, turning from the window. "Catherine, we've discussed this. The Indian Affairs Office handles reservations. The same office that has failed to deliver promised supplies for 3 consecutive months," Catherine countered, her eyes flashing. "There are children suffering from fever, Father." The governor recognized the stubborn set of his daughter's jaw, so like her mother's when she'd made up her mind. Annabel Hollister had been his moral compass until typhoid took her 5 years ago. Now their daughter had assumed that role, much to his pride and occasional frustration. "What would you have me do?" he asked, his tone softening. "The territorial budget, the mission hospital has gathered medicines," Catherine interrupted. "Dr. Morley has prepared everything. They just need an escort through Morgan Pass." Fletcher cleared his throat. "Miss Hollister, Morgan Pass runs perilously close to where the Blackwell gang was last reported. The governor couldn't possibly—" "I'm well aware of the geography, Mr. Fletcher," Catherine said, with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "That's why I've arranged for Marshal Caldwell to provide 2 deputies as escorts. We leave tomorrow at first light." Governor Hollister's expression hardened. "We, Catherine, absolutely not. I forbid it. Father, I've given the mission my word. These are diplomatic relations as much as humanitarian ones. As your representative, as my daughter, you will remain safely in Silver Falls," the governor stated, his voice adopting the tone that ended legislative debates. "I'll send Fletcher with the deputies if this mission is so important." Catherine's posture straightened, a sign her father recognized all too well. The Cheyenne women specifically requested a woman's presence. They don't trust government men after what happened at Yellow Creek last autumn. She held her father's gaze. "I've been planning this for weeks. My bags are already packed." Governor Hollister ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Then, unpack them. This discussion is over." He turned to his secretary. "Fletcher, send a message to Marshal Caldwell. Tell him I want 4 deputies, not 2, and you'll accompany them with the medicines." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "As you wish, Father," she said with unexpected acquiescence. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I'll inform Dr. Morley of the change in plans." After she had gone, Fletcher approached the governor's desk tentatively. "Sir, if I may, your daughter has her mother's determination." Hollister nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "And her intelligence, that's what worries me." He picked up the telegram about the Blackwell gang again. "Send a wire to Fort Laramie. I want updates on cavalry patrols near Morgan Pass for the next week." Outside the mansion, Catherine strode purposefully across the manicured grounds, her mind already forming an alternative plan. Her father was right to be concerned, but the suffering at the reservation wouldn't wait for safer conditions. She would visit Dr. Morley as promised, but instead of relaying her father's changes, she would confirm their original departure time. The deputies could meet her at the mission at dawn, and they would be halfway through Morgan Pass before her. Father discovered her absence. Unknown to the governor or his daughter, other eyes watched Silver Falls with calculated interest. From the cover of ponderosa pines on the ridge above town, a solitary figure observed the movement of people through a brass spyglass. He lowered the instrument and frowned, his weathered face revealing both concentration and concern. The man's name was Takoda, though most whites in the territory knew him only as Hunter. His features reflected his mixed heritage, the high cheekbones and obsidian eyes of his Cheyenne mother, combined with the stronger jaw and broader build of his white father. His black hair was cut shorter than tradition dictated, tied back with a simple leather cord. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, evidence of a brutal cavalry attack that had killed his mother's people when he was 15. Raised in the Cheyenne ways until his mother's death, Takoda had been sent to a government school, where teachers beat his native language from him and missionaries attempted to civilize the savagery they perceived. He had returned to the frontier 5 years later, fluent in English and forever changed, belonging fully to neither world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Now, at 32, he lived between cultures, tracking game and guiding for those who would pay him, avoiding the growing hostilities between settlers and the remaining free bands of his mother's people. His reputation as the territory's most skilled tracker had reached even the territorial governor, who occasionally employed him to guide important visitors through the mountains, though always at a distance from proper society. Lately, his tracking skills had been focused on a different kind of prey. The Blackwell gang had murdered an elderly Cheyenne couple who had refused to leave their ancestral lands when the reservation boundaries were redrawn. The old man, Swift Elk, had been one of the few elders who still treated Dakota with respect rather than suspicion. The territorial marshal showed little interest in pursuing justice for dead Indians, but Dakota had made a blood oath to find those responsible. The setting sun cast long shadows across the valley as Dakota spotted a lone rider emerging from town. Even at this distance, he recognized Catherine Hollister by her distinctive posture and the chestnut mare she favored. He had guided her father's hunting party the previous autumn and had observed the governor's daughter from afar, noting her kindness to servants and her curious intelligence. Now she rode not toward the mansion, but toward the mission hospital on the town's western edge. Dakota slipped silently from his observation point, making his way to where his paint stallion waited patiently among the trees. Tomorrow he would continue tracking the Blackwell gang's movement through the high country. His sources suggested they were planning something bigger than their usual raids, something connected to the governor himself. Whatever it was, violence would surely follow. As twilight deepened over Silver Falls, Catherine Hollister arrived at the modest mission hospital run by Dr. Jonah Morley, a former army surgeon whose crisis of conscience had led him to devote his life to caring for those ignored by territorial authorities. The mission consisted of a simple wooden church, a 2-story infirmary, and several outbuildings surrounded by a low stone wall. Catherine tied her mare at the hitching post and entered, without ceremony, finding the doctor inventorying supplies in his cluttered office. At 60, Morley's beard had gone completely white, but his hands remained steady and his blue eyes sharp behind round spectacles. "Catherine," he greeted her warmly, "I've finished preparing the medicines. Enough quinine to treat the fever outbreak. And bandages for—" He paused, noting her expression. "Your father objected to the journey, I take it?" "He wants to send Mr. Fletcher with additional deputies," Catherine replied, removing her riding gloves. "But we both know Fletcher would never reach the reservation in time. Chief Broken Lance's youngest granddaughter may not survive another week without treatment." Dr. Morley sighed, running a hand through his beard. "Your father's concerns aren't unfounded, my dear. The Blackwell gang has been particularly active near Morgan Pass." Catherine's grey eyes flashed with determination. "Which is precisely why we must go now, before they move any closer. I've secured the escort, and we have the supplies. We leave at dawn as planned." "Without your father's blessing?" Morley asked, though he already knew the answer. "With or without it," she confirmed. "I gave my word to the Cheyenne women. In their eyes, a promise from the governor's daughter represents the promise of the territory itself." The doctor studied her for a moment before nodding. "Your mother would be proud of your conviction, Catherine, but she would also urge caution." Catherine smiled at the mention of her mother, who had often accompanied Dr. Morley on his medical missions before her death. "I'll be cautious, but I won't be deterred. The deputies will meet us here at first light." As Catherine prepared to leave, Dr. Morley placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "There's something else you should know. I've heard rumors that the Blackwell gang isn't just raiding randomly. There's talk they're working for someone with political connections, someone who wants to ensure certain territorial contracts go to the right bidders. Catherine's brow furrowed. What kind of contracts? Railroad extensions, land clearances, reservation reductions, Morley replied. The usual business of territorial expansion, but with unusually violent enforcement. The implications settled heavily between them. If true, it meant corruption reached into the highest levels of territorial government, perhaps even among her father's advisors. Have you told my father these rumors? Morley shook his head. Rumors aren't evidence, and the governor has enough legitimate concerns. But be careful whom you trust, Catherine. Silver Falls isn't just a capital, it's a gathering of ambitions. With this troubling information weighing on her mind, Catherine rode back toward the mansion through the gathering. Darkness. The streets of Silver Falls had transformed with nightfall. Saloon doors swung open, spilling light and raucous laughter onto boardwalks, now populated by miners, gamblers, and women of questionable reputation, all giving wide berth to the governor's daughter as she passed. She was nearly home when the sound of angry voices drew her attention to an alley between the Mercantile and the land office. 3 men had cornered a fourth against the wall. Even in the dim light, Catherine could see the cornered man's distinctive beaded vest and long black hair, a Native American, outnumbered and in danger. Without hesitation, Catherine guided her. A mare into the alley's entrance. What's happening here? She demanded, her voice carrying the authority of her position. The men turned, startled by the interruption. Catherine recognized one of them, William Hayes, a local businessman with mining interests and a frequent dinner guest at the mansion. His face flushed with embarrassment at being discovered in such circumstances. Miss Hollister, Hayes stammered. Just a misunderstanding with this person. He was loitering behind white businesses. Catherine's gaze shifted to the Cheyenne man, who stood with quiet dignity despite his precarious situation. With a shock, she recognized Takoda, the scout who had guided her father's hunting expedition. Their eyes met briefly, his expression unreadable. "This man is known to me," Catherine stated firmly. "He's employed by the territorial government. As a guide and scout, I suggest you take your concerns to the marshal's office if you believe laws have been broken." Hayes and his companions exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unwilling to challenge the governor's daughter directly. With muttered apologies, they retreated, disappearing around the corner toward the nearest saloon. When they had gone, Catherine turned to Takoda. "Are you hurt?" "No," he replied, his deep voice revealing little emotion. He made no move to approach her horse, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you for your intervention, Miss Hollister, though it was unnecessary." Catherine studied him curiously. During her father's hunting expedition, Takoda had kept to himself, speaking only when directly addressed. She had observed his incredible tracking skills from afar, but had never conversed with him directly. "3 against 1 hardly seems like fair odds, Mr. Takoda," she replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just Takoda, and unfair odds are common in certain parts of Silver Falls." "What brings you into town?" Catherine asked, aware that Native Americans, even those who worked for whites, typically avoided population centers after dark. Takoda hesitated, seeming to measure his words carefully. "Information about men who burn homesteads and murder families." Catherine's pulse quickened. "The Blackwell gang. What do you know of them?" "Enough to track them," he answered simply. His dark eyes studied her with unexpected intensity. "You ride toward Morgan Pass tomorrow." It wasn't a question, and Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "How could you possibly know that?" "The mission doctor prepares medicines. Deputies are arranged. The reservation suffers from fever." Takoda shrugged slightly. "The mountains have many eyes and ears, Miss Hollister." "Then you also know how important This mission is, Catherine countered, uncomfortable with how much this man had observed without her knowledge. Dakota nodded once. Important, but dangerous. The Blackwell gang camps less than 15 miles from Morgan Pass. They watch the trail. Catherine's hands tightened on her reins. Are you certain? Marshal Caldwell's reports place them much further north. The marshal sees what men want him to see, Dakota replied cryptically. I see what the land reveals. He stepped closer to her horse, his movement fluid and silent. Take the southern route, through Cougar Canyon. It is longer but safer. Before Catherine could respond, hoofbeats approached from the direction of the mansion. A rider appeared at the alley entrance, one of her father's household guards. Miss Hollister, your father's been looking everywhere for you. Catherine turned back to thank Dakota for his warning, but the scout had vanished like a shadow into the gathering darkness. Only the faint impression of footprints in the dust showed he had been there at all. As she rode toward home, flanked by her father's guard, Catherine considered Dakota's warning. If the Blackwell gang truly watched Morgan Pass, their medicine convoy faced grave danger. Yet the southern route would add days to their journey, days the sick children at the reservation didn't have. She would proceed as planned, but with heightened caution. What troubled her more was Dakota's certainty about the gang's location when the territorial marshals remained unaware. Either the scout possessed truly remarkable tracking abilities, or someone was deliberately misleading law enforcement. By the time she reached the governor's mansion, Catherine had made her decision. The mission would proceed at dawn as planned, regardless of the risks. What she couldn't possibly know was how that decision would plunge her into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of territorial power, or that the mysterious Cheyenne scout would soon become her only hope for survival. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of amber and rose as Catherine Hollister secured the final supplies to her saddle. The mission courtyard bustled with quiet activity, 2 deputies checking their weapons, Dr. Morley loading medical supplies into saddlebags, and Brother Thomas, a young missionary, nervously mounting his mule for what would be his first journey into Cheyenne territory. A thin layer of frost covered the ground, evidence of the early autumn chill that had descended overnight. Catherine wore practical frontier attire, sturdy canvas trousers beneath her split riding skirt, a woolen shirt, and a deerskin jacket lined with sheepskin against the mountain cold. A wide-brimmed hat concealed most of her chestnut hair, which she had braided tightly for the journey. At her waist hung a Remington Derringer, small but lethal at close range, a gift from her father on her 21st birthday that she'd learned to use with remarkable accuracy. Your father will be furious, Dr. Morley observed quietly as he approached, handing her a packet of letters. These are for Chief Broken Lance and the head of the reservation school. Catherine tucked the correspondence into her saddlebag. Father will understand once we return with news that the fever has been contained. Her expression softened. He values life above protocol, even if he sometimes forgets it. The older of the 2 deputies, a grizzled veteran named Haskell, with a thick mustache and weather-beaten features, approached with a concerned expression. Miss Hollister, we should depart immediately if we aim to reach Morgan Pass by midday. Traveling through the pass after dark would be unwise. Catherine nodded, pulling on her leather gloves. I'm ready, Deputy. She turned to Dr. Morley. We'll return within the week. If Father sends men looking for me, I'll tell him you left with adequate protection on a mission of mercy, Morley assured her. Godspeed, Catherine. The small convoy departed Silver Falls just as the town began to stir. They took the northwest trail, skirting the edge of town to avoid passing the governor's mansion. Catherine rode at the front alongside Deputy Haskell, while the younger deputy, a man named Cooper with sandy hair and nervous eyes, brought up the rear. Between them rode Dr. Morley's assistant, Brother Thomas, leading a pack mule laden with medical supplies. As Silver Falls disappeared behind them, the trail began its gradual ascent into the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo range. Stands of aspen trees shimmered with golden leaves that whispered in the morning breeze, occasionally releasing showers of color that drifted across the rider's path. Catherine felt her spirits lift with each mile that carried them away from the constraints of the capital. "Have you traveled to the reservation before, Miss Hollister?" Brother Thomas asked, guiding his mule alongside her mare. "Twice," Catherine replied, "once with my mother when I was 14, and again last spring to observe the school. The conditions have deteriorated significantly since the new Indian commissioner took office." Thomas nodded earnestly. "Dr. Morley says you speak some Cheyenne. That's remarkable for a governor's daughter." Catherine smiled. "Hardly remarkable. My mother believed in building bridges rather than walls. She taught me that understanding begins with language. She didn't add that her father had discouraged her linguistic pursuits after her mother's death, concerned that such native sympathies might undermine his political position. By mid-morning, the trail had narrowed considerably, winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Pine forests replaced the aspen groves, creating shadowed corridors beneath towering evergreens. The air grew noticeably cooler as they climbed, and conversation dwindled as the riders focused on navigating the challenging path. Deputy Haskell called for a brief rest at a small clearing beside a mountain stream. While the others watered their horses, Catherine climbed a nearby outcropping to survey the country ahead. From this vantage point, she could see the jagged profile of Eagle Peak rising in the distance, the landmark that marked the approach to Morgan Pass. Something about the landscape troubled her, though she couldn't immediately identify the cause of her unease. Then she noticed it. A thin column of smoke rising from a canyon to the northwest, where no settlements or camps should exist. Takoda's warning about the Blackwell gang returned to her mind, prompting a shiver that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She was about to call Deputy Haskell's attention to the smoke when she noticed something else, a flash of reflected light from a rocky ridge about half a mile ahead. The glint appeared again, unmistakably the sun catching on glass or metal. Someone was watching their approach through a spyglass or rifle scope. Catherine descended quickly to where the others waited. "Deputy Haskell," she said quietly, "I believe we're being observed from the ridge ahead, and there's smoke rising from Thornton Canyon. Could be a camp." Haskell's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. "You're certain, Miss Hollister?" She nodded, pointing discreetly toward the ridge. "I saw light reflecting off glass, just there between those two pinnacles." The deputy's weathered face grew grave. "Could be hunters or prospectors," he said, though his tone suggested he believed otherwise. "Cooper, take the lead with Miss Hollister. I'll bring up the rear with Brother Thomas. Keep your rifle ready." As they mounted and continued their journey, Catherine noticed a marked change in the deputy's demeanor. Their eyes constantly scanned the surrounding terrain, and their hands remained close to their weapons. The carefree atmosphere of the morning had evaporated, replaced by tense vigilance. They had traveled perhaps another mile when Deputy Cooper suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Riders coming," he whispered, nodding toward a bend in the trail ahead. Catherine strained to hear, detecting the faint sound of approaching hoofbeats. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope it might be reinforcements sent by her father. Perhaps he had discovered her absence sooner than expected and dispatched additional men to ensure her safety. That hope died as 4 riders rounded the bend, their appearance instantly dispelling any notion of rescue. These men wore no uniforms, only trail-worn clothing and dust-covered hats pulled low over their faces. Most telling was the manner in which they blocked the narrow trail, spreading across its width with practiced precision. "Turn around," Haskell ordered quietly. "Back the way we came, now." But as Catherine turned her mare, she discovered their retreat was already cut off. Two more riders had appeared behind them, effectively trapping the small convoy in a pincer movement. The leader of the group ahead removed his hat, revealing a face that would have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. A neatly trimmed beard framed his jaw, giving him the appearance of a gentleman despite his frontier attire. "Well now," he called, his voice carrying a trace of southern drawl. "What brings the governor's daughter so far from Silver Falls? On such a fine morning?" Catherine's blood ran cold. These men knew exactly who she was. This was no random encounter. "We're on official territorial business," Deputy Haskell announced, his voice steady despite the dire circumstances. "Let us pass." The bearded man smiled, without warmth. "Official business, all the way out here? I don't recall the governor having jurisdiction over these mountains." His gaze shifted to Catherine. "Miss Hollister, I presume. Your reputation for charitable endeavors precedes you." Catherine straightened in her saddle, refusing to show fear. "We're bringing medical supplies to the reservation. There's a fever outbreak among the children." "Noble indeed," the man replied, with mock admiration. "Unfortunately, I can't allow you to continue. My employer has other plans that require your participation." "Your employer?" Catherine asked, buying time as she assessed their situation. 6 armed men against 2 deputies, herself and a terrified missionary. The odds were dismal. The bearded man chuckled. "Let's just say someone with significant interest in territorial affairs." He gestured to his men. "Gentlemen, secure our guests. Carefully now, Miss Hollister is a valuable commodity." As the bandits closed in, Deputy Haskell drew his revolver. With surprising speed, "Catherine, run!" he shouted, firing at the nearest outlaw. Chaos erupted in the narrow trail. Gunshots echoed off the canyon walls as Haskell's bullet found its mark, sending one of the attackers tumbling from his saddle. Catherine kicked her mare into motion, driving the animal toward a narrow gap between 2 outlaws. Brother Thomas screamed as a bullet struck him in the shoulder, toppling him from his mule. Catherine had nearly broken through the ambush when a rider intercepted her, grabbing her reins. She drew her derringer from its hidden holster, but before she could fire, another outlaw closed in from behind. A powerful arm wrapped around her waist, physically lifting her from the saddle. "No!" she cried, struggling against her captor as her derringer fell to the trail. Through the confusion, she caught glimpses of the unfolding violence. Deputy Cooper slumped across his horse, blood staining his shirt. Haskell fighting hand-to-hand with an outlaw. Brother Thomas cowering beside the fallen pack mule. The bearded man approached on horseback as Catherine was restrained between 2 outlaws. "That was unnecessary," he said, surveying the carnage with a frown. "Violence could have been avoided if your escorts had been more reasonable." "You're the Blackwell gang," Catherine stated, the grim reality becoming clear. "Jesse Blackwell." The man offered a mocking bow from his saddle. "At your service, Miss Hollister. Though I'm afraid you'll be the one serving our purposes now." From his vantage point high above the trail, Dakota watched the ambush unfold with growing alarm. He had been tracking the Blackwell gang for 3 days, following their movement through the high country with single-minded determination. Their sudden change of direction the previous evening had troubled him, suggesting they had received new orders or intelligence. Now he understood why. This was no random raid, but a calculated abduction of the governor's daughter. Dakota had positioned himself on an overlooking ridge after spotting the gang's scouts early that morning. He had hoped Catherine Hollister would heed his warning and take the southern route, but when he spotted her small convoy approaching Morgan Pass, he knew confrontation was inevitable. The distance was too great for effective use of his Winchester rifle, and even if he could pick off 1 or 2 outlaws, such action would likely endanger Catherine further. He needed to follow, to observe, to plan a more strategic intervention. With practiced stealth, Dakota descended the ridge via a game trail known only to local hunters and his mother's people. His paint stallion waited patiently in a secluded grove, hidden from both the main trail and any potential observers. As he mounted, Dakota heard more gunshots echo across the canyon, followed by silence that spoke of concluded violence. Below, the Blackwell gang worked efficiently in the aftermath of the ambush. One outlaw collected the deputy's weapons while another secured Catherine's hands before helping her mount a spare horse. Jesse Blackwell himself knelt beside the fallen brother Thomas, speaking in tones too low for Dakota to discern from his position. After a brief examination of Deputy Haskell's body, Blackwell gave orders that sent his men into motion. 2 outlaws began covering the signs of the ambush, sweeping the trail and moving bodies off the main path. The others secured the party's horses, redistributing the most valuable supplies among their own mounts. Most concerning to Dakota was the direction they prepared to take, not back toward their previous camp, but deeper into the mountains, toward territory so rugged that few white men ventured there, an area the Cheyenne called the Place of Falling Stones, where sheer cliffs and unpredictable rock slides had claimed many lives. Catherine Hollister sat straight-backed on her newly assigned mount, her face pale but composed, even as the outlaws prepared to depart with her in tow. Dakota noted with grudging admiration that she showed no signs of the hysteria common among captured whites. Instead, she seemed to be carefully observing her captors, perhaps searching for weaknesses or memorizing faces. When the gang departed, they left 2 men behind to eliminate all evidence of the confrontation. Dakota waited until the main party disappeared around a bend before moving to a better position to observe the remaining outlaws. Their task complete, these men mounted up and headed not after their companions, but back toward Silver Falls, presumably. To ensure no witnesses reported the ambush, Dakota faced a choice: follow Catherine's captors immediately or return to Silver Falls to inform the governor. After brief consideration, he chose to track the Blackwell gang. By the time he could reach Silver Falls and return with a posse, the kidnappers' trail would be cold, especially if the approaching storm delivered the snow it promised. As he prepared to pursue, Dakota noticed movement near the ambush site. One of the deputies, the younger one named Cooper, was still alive, attempting to crawl toward his fallen weapon. The outlaws had been careless in their haste. Dakota approached cautiously, rifle ready. Cooper looked up with pain-glazed eyes, blood soaking his shirt from a chest wound. "Indian!" he gasped, instinctively reaching for a gun that wasn't there. "Be still," Dakota commanded, kneeling beside the wounded man. "I am Dakota, scout for Governor Hollister. What happened here?" Recognition flickered in Cooper's eyes. "Blackwell gang," he wheezed. "Knew exactly who she was. Took her alive." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth with each labored word. Where were they taking her? Dakota pressed, knowing the deputy had little time left. "Heard one say, 'Devil's Tooth,'" Cooper managed. "Said someone would meet them there." His hand clutched weakly at Dakota's sleeve. "Not random. Someone planned it. Someone who knew." "Who?" Dakota demanded. "Who planned this?" But Cooper's eyes had already glazed over, his final breath escaping in a rattling sigh. Dakota closed the man's eyelids with a gentle pass of his hand, then quickly searched the bodies for any clues about the gang's intentions. From Haskell, he recovered a territorial badge that might prove useful. From the dead outlaw, he found nothing of value, except confirmation that these were indeed members of the notorious Blackwell gang. The man bore a distinctive scorpion tattoo on his wrist that matched descriptions Dakota had heard. Brother Thomas had been spared, though whether from mercy or oversight remained unclear. The missionary was nowhere to be seen, perhaps having fled into the woods after the attack, or been taken as an additional hostage. The medical supplies lay scattered across the trail, many containers broken and their contents trampled into the dirt. a bitter testament to Catherine's thwarted humanitarian mission. With no more time to spare, Takoda returned to his stallion and began tracking the Blackwell gang. Their trail led northeast, following an old hunting path that skirted the edge of Cheyenne territory. If Cooper's dying words were accurate, their destination was Devil's Tooth, a jagged mountain spire that rose like a fang against the sky, visible for miles across the territory. The afternoon brought heavy clouds that swallowed the mountain peaks, turning the forest prematurely dark. Takoda pushed forward relentlessly, reading signs that would be invisible to most white trackers. A broken pine needle, the particular way water gathered in a hoofprint, the subtle disturbance of lichen on a boulder where a rider had brushed past. By nightfall, the first snowflakes began to fall, threatening to obscure the trail completely. Takoda made camp in a sheltered overhang, allowing himself and his horse minimal rest. As he huddled beside a small, smokeless fire, he considered the implications of Cooper's final words. Someone had planned Catherine's abduction with precise knowledge of her movements. Someone connected enough to communicate with the Blackwell gang, yet positioned to know the governor's daughter would be traveling to the reservation. The conspiracy reached higher than common outlaws. At dawn, Takoda resumed his pursuit through a landscape transformed by a thin blanket of fresh snow. The gang's trail remained visible to his trained eye, 8 horses moving in single file along a ridgeline. They were heading directly for Devil's Tooth now, no longer attempting to conceal their direction. Meanwhile, in Silver Falls, Governor Hollister paced his office with mounting anxiety. Catherine had not returned for dinner the previous evening, and her bed remained untouched. His initial anger at her presumed defiance had gradually transformed into concern as the hours passed without word. "I've questioned everyone at the mansion," Fletcher reported, adjusting his spectacles nervously. "Miss Catherine told her maid she would be dining with Dr. Morley last evening, but she never arrived at the mission. Dr. Morley claims he hasn't seen her since yesterday afternoon." Governor Hollister's expression darkened. "She's gone to the reservation against my explicit orders." He pounded his fist on the desk. "Damn her stubbornness! Send riders to Morgan Pass immediately. I want her intercepted and brought home before she reaches Cheyenne territory." Fletcher hesitated. "Sir, there's something else. Marshal Caldwell reports that his deputies Haskell and Cooper failed to report in this morning. They were scheduled for regular patrol, but never arrived at the marshal's office." A cold feeling settled in Hollister's stomach. The same deputies. "Catherine arranged as escorts?" "Yes, sir," Fletcher confirmed. "And Dr. Morley's assistant, Brother Thomas, is also unaccounted for. The mission staff assumed he was preparing for a journey to the reservation, but his belongings remain untouched." In his quarters, the governor sank into his chair, the implications washing over him like ice water. "This is no coincidence, Fletcher. Send for Marshal Caldwell immediately and have Colonel Harrison prepare a cavalry detachment. I want search parties covering every trail between here and the reservation." "Sir," Fletcher began hesitantly, "if Miss Catherine has indeed been taken, shouldn't we consider the possibility of ransom demands? Perhaps waiting for communication would be prudent." Hollister's face hardened. "My daughter is out there somewhere, Fletcher. I will not sit idle while a commotion in the outer office interrupted him. Voices rose in alarm, followed by hurried footsteps. The door burst open to reveal Marshal Caldwell supporting a blood-stained, exhausted figure, Brother Thomas, his left arm roughly bandaged and his eyes wild with terror. "Governor!" The young missionary gasped, nearly collapsing as the marshal helped him to a chair. Ambushed. Morgan Pass. The Blackwell gang. Hollister's world tilted beneath him. "My daughter," he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. Brother Thomas's face crumpled. "Taken," he confirmed. "They killed the deputies. I escaped during the confusion and hid in the woods until nightfall, then walked all night." "Where?" Hollister demanded, gripping the missionary's uninjured shoulder. Where did they take her? The mountains, Thomas managed before his strength failed him. North, toward the high peaks. They said something about Devil's Tooth. As the mission doctor was summoned to tend to Brother Thomas, Governor Hollister turned to Marshal Caldwell. Assemble every available man. I want posses searching every trail, every canyon, between here and Devil's Tooth. Sir, Caldwell replied cautiously, Devil's Tooth is nearly 60 miles of wilderness from here. The terrain is some of the most treacherous in the territory, with the storm moving in. I don't care if you have to search every inch of the Sangre de Cristo range, Hollister thundered. That's my daughter in the hands of murderers. Fletcher stepped forward. Governor, there may be another option. The half-breed scout Takoda. He knows those mountains better than anyone. If we could locate him, find him, Hollister ordered immediately. Offer whatever payment necessary. And Fletcher, he added, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, when my daughter is safely home, I want the Blackwell gang wiped from the face of the earth. Every last one of them. High in the mountains, Catherine Hollister struggled to maintain her balance as her horse navigated a treacherous switchback trail. Her hands were bound before her, tied to the saddle horn, and every jolt threatened to unseat her. The freezing wind cut through her jacket, carrying the first snowflakes of a brewing storm. Jesse Blackwell rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure his valuable prisoner remained secure. The other outlaws maintained a watchful perimeter, their eyes constantly scanning the surrounding peaks for any sign of pursuit. Despite her physical discomfort and the horror of witnessing Deputy Haskell's murder, Catherine forced herself to remain alert, memorizing landmarks and listening carefully to her captor's conversations. If an opportunity for escape presented itself, she would need every advantage. Not much further, Miss Hollister, Blackwell called over his shoulder, his breath forming clouds in the increasingly frigid air. Our accommodations won't match your father's mansion, but they'll keep you alive until our business concludes. What business? Catherine demanded, her voice steady despite her fear. What possible advantage is there in abducting a governor's daughter? Blackwell reined in his horse, allowing her to draw alongside him. For a moment, he studied her with something approaching admiration. You really don't understand your value, do you? Your father controls railroad contracts worth millions, land grants that will determine the future of this territory for generations. My father doesn't negotiate with criminals, Catherine stated firmly. A smile touched Blackwell's bearded face. Everyone negotiates when the stakes are high enough, Miss Hollister. Even righteous governors with political ambitions. He urged, his horse forward. Besides, we're merely the instrument, not the architect. This confirmation of a larger conspiracy sent a chill through Catherine that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Someone powerful had orchestrated her abduction, someone who knew her well enough to predict she would defy her father and travel to the reservation. As they rounded a final ridge, Devil's Tooth came into view. A massive stone spire thrusting skyward like a jagged bone through the earth's flesh. At its base, nestled against the cliff face, stood a crude cabin with a stone chimney. Two more men emerged from the structure as the riders approached, rifles ready until they recognized Blackwell. You're late, called one, a burly man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Weather's turning bad. Another hour, and the pass would have been impassable. We had complications, Blackwell replied, dismounting and stretching his trail-stiffened limbs. The deputies proved uncooperative. The scarred man's gaze shifted to Catherine, his expression calculating as he evaluated this new asset. So this is Governor Hollister's girl? Don't look like much. Show some respect, Reeves, Blackwell warned. Miss Hollister is our guest until further notice. He turned to his men. Get her inside before this snow gets worse. Wheeler, take first. Watch. The rest of you, secure the horses and prepare for a cold night. As Blackwell cut the ropes binding her to the saddle, Catherine regarded him with cold dignity. "You won't succeed," she said quietly. "Whatever your plan, whoever you're working for, it will fail." "Strong words from a hostage," Blackwell remarked, helping her dismount with unexpected courtesy. "But even the strongest spirit bends under the right pressure. You'd be wise to cooperate, Miss Hollister. Not everyone in our organization shares my civilized approach." Behind them, the storm clouds swallowed the last light of day as snow began to fall in earnest. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, a lone tracker followed their trail with grim determination, closing the distance with each passing hour. The true ordeal had only just begun. Snowfall transformed the high country into a realm of hushed white and spectral shadows. The storm had intensified through the night, blanketing the mountains in 8 inches of fresh powder that sparkled like diamond dust in the early morning light. Such conditions would have obliterated any trail for an ordinary tracker, rendering pursuit impossible. Takoda was no ordinary tracker. He moved like a ghost through the snow-laden forest, reading subtle signs invisible to untrained eyes. A depression beneath a pine where snow had settled differently, the particular way ice crystals formed around a broken branch, the faint discoloration where horse urine had melted through the white blanket. He had abandoned his stallion 2 miles back when the terrain became too treacherous for mounted travel, continuing on snowshoes fashioned from pine branches and rawhide strips carried in his pack. Pausing atop a windswept ridge, Takoda surveyed the landscape through a gap in the swirling snow. Devil's Tooth rose before him, its jagged spire partially obscured by low clouds. At its base, barely visible against the white backdrop, stood the cabin where Catherine Hollister was being held. Thin smoke rose from the stone chimney, confirming occupation despite the brutal weather. Takoda settled into a sheltered position among wind-twisted pines to observe the outlaw camp. Through his spyglass he counted 3 sentries, one on the cabin's crude porch, another patrolling the perimeter, and a third positioned on a rock outcropping with clear sightlines to all possible approach routes. The placement suggested military experience among the gang members. As he watched, the cabin door opened and a figure emerged, Jesse Blackwell himself, recognizable by his distinctive beard and commanding posture. The outlaw leader conversed briefly with the porch sentry before, scanning the surrounding slopes with a practiced eye. Takoda remained motionless, knowing that movement, not form, caught the human eye in such conditions. When Blackwell returned inside, Takoda shifted his focus to assessing options. A direct assault would be suicidal against such numbers with established defensive positions. Stealth offered the only viable approach, but even that presented significant challenges with sentries positioned for overlapping fields of view. He would need to wait for darkness and the intensifying storm that weather signs promised was approaching. Nature herself would provide the distraction he required. Inside the cabin, Catherine Hollister sat on a rough wooden bench near the stone fireplace, her hands now bound before her with a length of rope that allowed limited movement. She had spent an uncomfortable night on a bearskin pallet in the corner, under constant guard and subjected to the suspicious glares of men unaccustomed to the presence of a governor's daughter in their midst. The cabin's interior was spare but functional. A main room with fireplace and rough-hewn table, 2 smaller chambers partitioned by hanging blankets, and a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. 8 men occupied the space, their weapons never far from reach. Catherine had catalogued each face, memorizing details that might prove useful if she survived to testify. Jesse Blackwell sat at the table, cleaning a Colt revolver with methodical precision. Unlike his men, who passed the confinement in card, games or restless pacing, Blackwell maintained an unsettling calm that spoke of absolute confidence in his position. "You must be hungry," he observed without looking up from his task. "Reeves, bring Miss Hollister some breakfast." The scarred man called Reeves grudgingly ladled stew from a pot hanging over the fire into a wooden bowl. He thrust it toward Catherine with a mocking half-bow. "Your dinner, Your Highness." Catherine accepted the bowl with quiet dignity. "Thank you." She had learned that maintaining civility, even in captivity, sometimes unnerved men who expected hysteria or pleading from female prisoners. "Ain't you going to ask what's in it?" Reeves prodded, clearly disappointed by her composure. "I assume it's the same rabbit stew you're all eating," Catherine replied evenly. "Poison would defeat the purpose of keeping me alive." A chuckle came from Blackwell at the table. "She has you there, Reeves. Miss Hollister understands her value too well to fear petty cruelties." Catherine ate carefully, using the opportunity to study the cabin's layout and the men's routines. One outlaw, a younger man called Wheeler, seemed less hardened than the others. He avoided looking directly at her and had objected quietly when Reeves suggested searching her more thoroughly. Upon arrival, if an opportunity for escape presented itself, Wheeler might prove the weak link. "How long do you intend to keep me here?" she asked Blackwell directly, setting aside her empty bowl. The outlaw leader reassembled his revolver with practiced efficiency. "That depends on your father's cooperation, and how quickly our mutual acquaintance can arrange the necessary documents." "Mutual acquaintance," Blackwell smiled thinly. "Someone you know quite well, I believe. Someone who dines at the governor's table while orchestrating territorial affairs from the shadows." Before Catherine could press further, the cabin door burst open, admitting a flurry of snow and a frost-covered sentry. "Riders coming up the South Ridge," he reported tersely. "At least 6, maybe more." Blackwell's expression hardened. "The governor's men couldn't have found us this quickly." He turned to Catherine with sudden suspicion. "Unless you had additional escorts following at a distance." "If I did, I wouldn't tell you," Catherine responded, though she knew her father couldn't possibly have organized a rescue party so soon, especially in such treacherous conditions. "Reeves, take 2 men and investigate," Blackwell ordered. "The rest of you, defensive positions, and someone secure our guest more thoroughly. She stays out of sight until we determine who's approaching." Catherine found herself roughly pulled to her feet and dragged toward one of the partitioned chambers. As Reeves and 2 others armed themselves and departed, she caught a glimpse through the open door of dark shapes moving through the swirling snow on the ridge below. The approaching riders were not the territorial militia or her father's men. Their formation and manner of approach suggested something else entirely. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran through Catherine as she recognized the distinctive silhouettes of Cheyenne warriors. Miles away in Silver Falls, Governor Hollister had transformed his office into a command center. Maps covered every surface, marking possible routes through the Sangre de Cristo range toward Devil's Tooth. Marshal Caldwell coordinated with cavalry officers from Fort Laramie, who had arrived at dawn with a detachment of 20 soldiers, despite the deteriorating weather. "The main pass is completely snowbound," Colonel Harrison reported, removing his gloves as he approached the governor's desk. "We've dispatched scouts to find alternative routes, but with this storm—" "I don't want excuses, Colonel," Hollister interrupted, his face haggard from a sleepless night. "I want my daughter found." "Sir," Marshal Caldwell interjected carefully, "we've received no ransom demands yet. This suggests the Blackwell gang may be holding Miss Catherine for reasons beyond immediate financial gain." Fletcher, who had been coordinating communications with outlying settlements, stepped forward with a telegram in hand. "Governor, we've received troubling news from Judge Parker in Helena. It appears significant land speculation has been occurring along the proposed Southern Railroad extension, land acquired just weeks before the route was publicly announced." Hollister frowned. "How is this relevant to Catherine's abduction?" "The majority investor in these transactions is registered as Western Territorial Holdings," Fletcher explained, "a company controlled by William Hayes." The governor's expression darkened at the mention of Hayes, a prominent businessman who had contributed generously to Hollister's campaigns and frequently dined at the mansion. "You're suggesting Hayes is connected to the Blackwell gang? That's a serious accusation, Fletcher." "I'm suggesting the timing warrants investigation," Fletcher replied carefully, "especially given that Hayes was among the few who knew of the Railroad Commission's decision before it became public, information he learned at your dinner table 3 weeks ago." Hollister sank into his chair, the implications washing over him. If Hayes had used privileged information for land speculation, it would constitute a serious breach of trust. If he was somehow connected to Catherine's abduction, it would be unforgivable treachery. "What of the scout?" Hollister asked, changing the subject abruptly. "Any word from Dakota?" Marshal Caldwell shook his head. "No one has seen him in Silver Falls for days. We've sent riders to his usual haunts, but the storm has complicated the search." "Sir," Colonel Harrison interjected, "even if we locate this scout, what guarantee do we have he'll help? His loyalties are questionable at best. Half-breeds often harbor resentments against territorial authorities." Governor Hollister fixed the colonel with a steely gaze. "Dakota knows those mountains better than any man alive. Whatever his heritage, he's never given cause to doubt his word. Find him." As the search plans continued, no one noticed the distinguished figure who had paused outside the partially open door, listening intently before continuing down the corridor. William Hayes straightened his waistcoat with manicured hands as he exited the government building, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts as he mounted his waiting horse. Back in the mountains, Dakota had shifted position for a better view of the approaching riders. The newcomers were indeed Cheyenne warriors, 7 in total, moving with the confidence of men on familiar hunting grounds despite the challenging conditions. They carried rifles alongside traditional weapons, and their approach suggested they were not simply passing through, but deliberately heading for the cabin. The development was unexpected and potentially disastrous. If the Cheyenne attacked the cabin now, Catherine might be killed in the crossfire. Worse, such an attack would feed the territorial narrative of Indian savagery, regardless of provocation. Dakota needed to intercept the warriors before they encountered Blackwell's sentries. Moving with practiced stealth, he descended the ridge on a parallel track, leaving virtually no trail as he navigated through dense pine stands. When he judged himself sufficiently ahead of the Cheyenne party, he emerged onto the trail and waited, standing tall with empty hands raised. Minutes later, the lead rider appeared through the swirling snow. Recognition flashed across the warrior's face, followed by surprise and then guarded respect. He raised his hand, halting the others. "2 rivers," the leader acknowledged in Cheyenne using Dakota's birth name. "You walk far from the white man's. A town. Far Eagle," Dakota responded in the same language. "You and your brothers ride dangerous paths. The men ahead have many guns and no honor." Far Eagle, a middle-aged warrior with 3 eagle feathers in his hair signifying battle achievements, dismounted to stand before Dakota. Though they had not seen each other in years, the men shared history. Far Eagle had been a friend to Dakota's mother before the reservation system fractured the Cheyenne bands. "We hunt the men who murdered Old Elk and his wife," Far Eagle explained, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Their tracks led here before the snow covered them." Dakota nodded, understanding immediately. Swift Elk, the Cheyenne elder who had been murdered, was known to whites as Old Elk due to a mistranslation. These warriors sought the same justice. Dakota himself pursued. "The men you seek are indeed ahead," Dakota confirmed, "but they hold a white woman captive, the daughter of the territorial governor." Far Eagle's expression remained impassive, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Why should this concern us? The white chief's laws do not protect our people. His soldiers drive us from our hunting grounds. Perhaps he should taste the same bitter medicine." The woman opposed this, Dakota explained carefully. She journeyed to bring medicine to the reservation children before she was taken. She is not her father." The Cheyenne warriors conferred briefly among themselves, their voices low against the moaning wind. Finally, Far Eagle turned back to Takoda. "What? Do you propose 2 rivers, you who walk between worlds?" Takoda pointed toward the ridge, where Reeves and his men were now visible, moving cautiously through the snow. "The woman must be freed, but bloodshed will only bring the army down upon all Cheyenne, guilty and innocent alike. I ask that you withdraw. Let me extract her under cover of the coming storm." Far Eagle studied Takoda's face, searching for deception, and finding none. "You were once counted among the people, now you track for white men. Why risk your life for this woman? Because innocent blood calls for justice, regardless of which people it belongs to," Takoda answered simply. "As my mother taught me." Something shifted in Far Eagle's expression, a softening around the eyes that suggested respect rekindled. He reached beneath his buffalo robe and withdrew a leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "Your mother's medicine," he said, offering the pouch. "I kept it when she journeyed to the spirit world, knowing her son might one day remember his first path." Takoda accepted the pouch with solemn reverence, recognizing the sacred objects his mother had used in healing ceremonies. "Thank you, Far Eagle." The Cheyenne leader remounted his horse. "We will withdraw to Black Beaver Creek until the storm passes. If you have not freed the woman by the time the snow stops falling, we will return, and the men who killed Swift. Elk will join him in the afterlife, regardless of who stands with them." As the warriors disappeared into the swirling snow, Takoda secured the medicine pouch inside his jacket. The encounter had bought time, but also imposed a deadline. The approaching storm would likely last through the night, giving him perhaps 12 hours to act before the Cheyenne returned. He circled back toward his observation point, arriving just as Reeves and his companions returned to the cabin. Through his spyglass, Takoda could see the outlaws' agitated movements as they reported finding tracks, but no riders. Blackwell emerged onto the porch, scanning the ridgelines with visible concern before ordering his men back inside. The storm intensified as afternoon faded toward evening, winds howling through the mountain passes and driving snow horizontally across exposed slopes. Such conditions would normally force all sensible creatures to seek shelter, making it the perfect opportunity for one who embraced the storm's fury as an ally. Inside the cabin, tension had heightened following Reeves's report. The outlaws checked and rechecked their weapons, positioning themselves near windows and the single door. Catherine had been secured to a support post in the main room, her hands bound behind her and her ankles tied together. "Probably just mountain lions spooked your men," one outlaw suggested, peering nervously through frost-covered window glass. "Nothing human would be out in this weather." "Mountain lions don't leave shod hoofprints," Blackwell replied tersely. "And nothing natural explains why our messenger hasn't returned from Silver Falls." He approached Catherine, crouching to meet her eyes. "Your father works quickly, it seems." "If it were my father's men, you'd know it," Catherine responded coolly. "A full cavalry detachment wouldn't be so subtle." Blackwell studied her face, searching for deception. Then who? Catherine had her suspicions after glimpsing the riders, but remained silent. Let Blackwell fear the unknown. Uncertainty would make him more prone to mistakes. The outlaw leader straightened, making a decision. "We move her tonight, once the storm reaches its peak. The original plan is compromised." "In this weather?" Reeves objected. "The North Pass will be impassable." "We take the low canyon," Blackwell countered. "Longer route but sheltered from the worst of it." "And if we're being watched?" another outlaw asked. Blackwell checked his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Then whoever's watching dies," He turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the horses. We leave at midnight." As the outlaws made preparations, Catherine tested her bindings subtly, finding them secure, but not cruelly tight. The ropes had enough. Give that circulation continued to her extremities, a small mercy that might prove vital if an opportunity for escape presented itself. She observed the men's movements carefully, noting that discord had crept into their previously disciplined operation. The younger outlaw, Wheeler, approached with a cup of water, holding it to her lips. "Drink," he said quietly. "It's going to be a cold journey." Catherine accepted the water gratefully. "Where are they taking me?" she asked in a low voice. Wheeler glanced nervously toward Blackwell, who was occupied with studying a map. "Abandoned mining camp," he whispered, 10 miles northwest. "Someone important is meeting us there." "Who?" Catherine pressed, sensing Wheeler's conflicted loyalties. Before he could answer, Blackwell looked up sharply. "Wheeler! Check the horses. Make sure they're properly sheltered until departure." The young man moved away quickly, leaving Catherine with the tantalizing fragment of information. An abandoned mining camp to the northwest would likely be the old Silver Crown operation, shuttered 3 years earlier when the vein played out. Its remote location and existing structures would make it an ideal rendezvous point. The cabin grew. Quiet as evening deepened into night, wind moaned around the eaves like restless spirits, and snow accumulated against the door in drifts that required periodic clearing. The outlaws took turns resting while maintaining watches, their earlier. Bravado subdued by the ferocity of the mountain storm, near midnight, as Blackwell had ordered, preparations for departure began. Catherine was untied from the post, but kept securely bound as the men donned heavy coats and checked weapons one final time. Outside, horses stomped nervously in the brutal conditions, steam rising from their nostrils as outlaws secured saddles. Despite the howling wind, "Bring her," Blackwell ordered, adjusting his hat against the stinging snow. 2 men grasped Catherine's arms, guiding her toward the door. As they emerged onto the porch, the full force of the storm struck like a physical blow. Visibility extended barely 10 feet, and the cold cut through clothing with knife-like precision. Catherine gasped involuntarily as the wind stole her breath. The horses were barely visible as dark shapes against the swirling white background. One outlaw mounted first, then reached down to help lift Catherine onto the saddle in front of him. With her hands still bound, maintaining balance would be nearly impossible without the outlaw's supporting arm. "Single file!" Blackwell shouted above the wind. "Keep visual contact with the rider ahead at all times. Wheeler takes point. Reeves brings up the rear." As the outlaws mounted and formed their line, a sudden sound cut through the storm, a high-pitched, ululating cry that raised the hair on the back of Catherine's neck. It came from everywhere and nowhere, impossible to locate in the swirling snow. "What the hell was that?" one man yelled, his horse spinning nervously beneath him. "Probably just the wind in the rocks," Blackwell responded, though his hand moved to his holster. "Stay alert," and the sound came again, closer this time, followed by a thudding impact as something struck the cabin wall near the door. All eyes turned to see an arrow vibrating in the timber, its shaft decorated with distinctive Cheyenne markings. "Indians!" Reeves shouted, drawing his revolver and firing blindly into the storm. The shot echoed uselessly across the mountainside, swallowed by the howling wind. Chaos erupted as horses reared in panic and outlaws shouted contradictory orders. Blackwell maintained his composure, directing his men with sharp commands. "Inside, defensive positions. Bring the woman." Catherine felt herself being dragged from the saddle as the outlaws retreated toward the cabin's relative safety. As her feet touched the ground, another arrow whistled through the night, striking the outlaw holding her left arm. He screamed, releasing his grip as he clutched at the shaft protruding from his shoulder. Instinctively, Catherine drove her elbow into the second outlaw's ribs, breaking free as he doubled over. With her hands still bound before her, she plunged into the swirling snow, away from the cabin and the confused shouts behind her. She had managed perhaps 20 yards when a strong arm encircled her waist from behind. Catherine fought viciously, kicking and twisting against her captor until a familiar voice spoke directly into her ear. "Be still," Dakota commanded. "I am here to help you." Catherine froze in surprise, twisting to see the Cheyenne scout's face partially concealed by a fur-lined hood. "Dakota? How—" "No time," he interrupted, producing a knife and quickly cutting her bindings. "Can you run?" Behind them, lantern light spilled from the cabin as outlaws regrouped for pursuit. Gunshots punctuated the howling wind, bullets passing harmlessly overhead as the storm confused the shooter's aim. "Yes," Catherine answered, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. Dakota handed her a small hunting knife. "Stay close. Step where I step." Without further explanation, he turned and moved into the storm, his form almost immediately becoming indistinct in the swirling snow. Catherine followed, placing her feet carefully in his tracks while fighting the wind that threatened to knock her sideways. Her city-bred confidence wavered in the face of such elemental fury, but she pressed on, knowing that hesitation meant recapture or death. They had traveled perhaps 100 yards when Dakota suddenly pulled her down behind a snow-covered boulder. Pressing a finger to his lips, he pointed toward a dark shape moving through the storm barely 20 feet away, one of the outlaws, rifle raised, peering into the whiteness for any sign of their passage. The man moved directly toward their position, guided by some hunter's instinct despite the impossible conditions. Dakota tensed beside Catherine, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. They were trapped between the boulder and a steep drop-off, with no escape route that wouldn't expose them to the searcher. Just as the outlaw was about to discover their hiding place, another eerie cry echoed across the mountainside, similar to the one that had preceded the arrow attack, but from the opposite direction. The outlaw pivoted, momentarily distracted, giving Dakota the opening he needed. The Cheyenne scout moved like a shadow, flowing from concealment to attack in a single fluid motion. Before the outlaw could react, Dakota had disarmed him and delivered a precise blow to the temple that dropped the man unconscious into the snow. "Cheyenne war cry," Dakota explained as he quickly bound the outlaw with his own belt. "Travels strangely in storms, seems to come from everywhere." "You created a diversion with arrows," Catherine realized, "making them think they were under attack by multiple warriors." Dakota nodded, retrieving the outlaw's rifle and ammunition. "An old hunting technique. Confusion is a weapon against superior numbers." He offered the rifle to Catherine. "Can you shoot?" She accepted the weapon with determined hands. "My father insisted I learn. I'm a fair shot with a rifle, better with a pistol." Something like approval flickered in Dakota's dark eyes before he turned away. "We must keep moving. The storm covers our tracks but also hides dangers. Stay close." They continued through the blizzard, navigating by landmarks only Dakota could discern in the near whiteout conditions. Behind them, faint shouts and occasional gunfire indicated the outlaws were mounting a disorganized pursuit. The storm, however, proved a more effective ally to the escapees than any human assistance could have been, swallowing their trail and confusing their hunters. After nearly an hour of grueling travel, Dakota led Catherine into a narrow crevice in the mountainside. The passage twisted inward, eventually opening into a small cave where the howling of the wind diminished to a distant moan. Dakota quickly assembled materials for a small fire, shielded from outside view by the cave's configuration. As warmth gradually returned to her frozen limbs, Catherine studied her rescuer with new appreciation. Dakota moved with economical precision, establishing their shelter with practiced efficiency. He melted snow in a small metal cup, adding herbs from her pouch before offering the steaming liquid to Catherine. "Drink," he instructed. "It will warm you from within and prevent fever." She accepted gratefully, the bitter but not unpleasant taste spreading healing warmth through her body. "How did you find me?" she asked when she had finished. Takoda fed small sticks into the fire, keeping the flame low but steady. "I followed. From the ambush site, watched the cabin, waited for the storm. You saw the ambush?" Catherine asked, horror rising at the memory of the deputy's murders. "Why didn't you intervene?" "1 against 6, with you in their power," Takoda replied without defensiveness. "They would have killed you first. I chose to follow, to plan, to wait for better opportunity. The pragmatic logic was undeniable, though it didn't ease the grief of lives lost." "The missionary, Brother Thomas, did he survive?" "He escaped during the attack, reached Silver Falls yesterday with news of your capture." Relief washed through Catherine at this confirmation that her father would know what had happened. "Then, search parties will be looking for us. The storm blocks all normal passages," Takoda explained. "Your father's men cannot reach this territory until it clears, and Blackwell plans to move you elsewhere before then." "The old Silver Crown mine," Catherine supplied. "Someone important is meeting them there. Someone connected to my father's administration, I think." Takoda's expression sharpened with interest. "This confirms what the dying deputy said. A conspiracy reaching into territorial government." Added more wood to their small fire as Catherine processed the implications. If territorial officials were involved in her kidnapping, the corruption extended deeper than anyone had suspected. The isolation of their mountain shelter suddenly seemed less threatening than the rot at the core of her father's government. "Why are you helping me?" Catherine asked directly. "You risk your life against overwhelming odds for the daughter of a governor whose policies have pushed your mother's people onto reservations." Takoda was silent for a long moment, his scarred face impassive in the firelight. Finally, he withdrew a beaded pouch from inside his jacket, the medicine bag Far Eagle had given him. "This belonged to my mother," he explained, his deep voice softening slightly. "She taught that evil must be confronted regardless of which people commit it or suffer from it. The men who took you also murdered an elderly Cheyenne couple who had shown me kindness." He returned the pouch to his jacket. "Sometimes fighting for justice means crossing boundaries others cannot see past. Your actions toward the reservation showed you understand this." Catherine nodded slowly, recognizing the profound philosophy beneath his simple words. "What happens when the storm ends?" "We continue northeast, away from their expected route," Takoda replied. "There is a trading post 2 days' journey from here. From there, we can send word to your father." "And if Blackwell tracks us?" Catherine asked, acutely aware of their vulnerability despite Takoda's remarkable skills. The Cheyenne scout's expression hardened. "Then he will learn that some hunts end with the hunter becoming the prey." He checked his weapons with practiced efficiency before adding, "Rest now. The storm gives us temporary safety, but dawn brings new challenges." As Catherine settled against the cave wall, physical exhaustion finally overwhelming her, she observed Takoda maintaining his vigilant watch at the cave entrance. This man of two worlds, rejected by both yet embodying the best qualities of each, had risked everything to save the daughter of a man whose policies had harmed his people. In the flickering firelight, as the storm raged beyond their shelter, Catherine recognized that her understanding of justice and courage would never be the same after this journey through the mountains with her unlikely guardian. Dawn broke across the mountains, a pale luminescence filtering through thinning clouds. As the storm finally exhausted itself, the world it revealed seemed newly created, pristine white slopes unmarked by human passage, trees transformed into crystalline sculptures, every rock and crevice redefined by snow. Takoda stood at the cave entrance, assessing conditions with the practiced eye of one who read nature's moods as easily as others read printed words. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of fresh powder in the high country, obliterating all tracks but also making new passage treacherously slow. More concerning were the heavy snow cornices overhanging key passes, spring-loaded death traps waiting. For the unwary traveller, Catherine joined him, having slept fitfully through the night despite exhaustion. She had fashioned a rough fur collar from materials in Dakota's pack to protect against the biting cold that persisted even as the storm abated. "Can they track us in this?" she asked, surveying the transformed landscape. "Not by ordinary means," Dakota replied, "but Blackwell is no ordinary tracker. Ordinary." He pointed toward the distant western ridge where the cabin stood, now barely visible as a dark speck against the whiteness. "They will search the most logical escape routes first. We go where they won't expect." "Which is where?" Catherine asked, mentally preparing herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. Dakota gestured toward a seemingly impassable cliff face to the northeast. "There is a hunter's path, known only to my mother's people. It follows game trails too narrow for horses, but navigable on foot. And after that, 8 miles to Eagle Rock, then down into Whispering Pine Valley. The trading post lies another day beyond." Dakota shouldered his pack and handed Catherine the rifle he'd taken from the outlaw. "We have perhaps 2 hours before they organize a proper search. We must use them well." They set out across the snow-covered slope, Dakota breaking trail while Catherine followed in his footsteps. The going was arduous, each step sinking knee-deep despite the snowshoes Dakota had fashioned from pine branches. By mid-morning, they had covered barely 2 miles, though the meandering route through sheltered ravines and along ridgelines kept them concealed from any watchers at the cabin. As they paused briefly beneath an overhanging rock, Catherine observed a column of dark smoke rising from the direction of the cabin. "They're burning something," she noted with concern. Dakota studied the smoke, his expression darkening. "Not the cabin. Too much smoke. Wrong color." He adjusted his pack grimly. "They're sending a signal. To whom?" "Whoever waits at the mining camp. They're calling for reinforcements." The implications hung between them as they pressed on, now moving with increased urgency despite the challenging terrain. They reached the cliff face Dakota had indicated before noon, finding an almost invisible fissure that widened into a crude passageway through the rock. "The people call this Spirit Path," Dakota explained as they navigated the narrow corridor. "Legend says it was carved by the thunder beings during the world's creation." The passage twisted upward through the mountain's heart, occasionally opening to breathtaking vistas before plunging back into shadow. In places, ancient hand and footholds had been carved into the living rock, evidence of generations of native travelers who had used this secret route. They emerged onto a wind-swept plateau as the sun reached its zenith. From this elevation, they could see for miles across the territory the endless rippling white of snow-covered peaks, the dark green of pine forests in the sheltered valleys, and far to the southwest, the faint smudge that marked Silver Fall's location. "There," Dakota said, pointing northeast to a distinctive rock formation that jutted from a ridge like the prow of a great stone ship. "Eagle Rock. Beyond it lies our path down to the valley." Catherine shaded her eyes, gauging the distance. "We can reach it by nightfall?" "If we maintain this pace," Dakota confirmed, "though the descent beyond will require daylight. We'll make camp at the rock." As they crossed the plateau, Catherine noticed Dakota repeatedly scanning the back trail and the valleys below. His vigilance confirmed her suspicion that despite the challenging conditions, he expected pursuit. "You believe Blackwell will find our trail," she observed. Dakota nodded without breaking stride. He was military scout during the war. Such men develop instincts beyond ordinary tracking. "Like you," Catherine noted. The comparison drew a brief, sardonic smile. The difference is I learned from those who have read these mountains for 1,000 years. He learned from men who have been here less than one lifetime. By late afternoon, they had covered another 4 miles, though the journey had grown increasingly treacherous as they navigated narrow ledges where a single misstep meant certain death. Takoda moved with fluid confidence, occasionally extending a steadying hand when Catherine faced particularly challenging passages. They were traversing a narrow ridge when Takoda suddenly froze, dropping into a crouch and signaling Catherine to do the same. She followed his gaze toward the valley they had left hours earlier, where 3 dark figures on horseback moved through the snow, unmistakably following their general direction despite the lack of visible tracks. "How?" Catherine whispered. Dismayed by this confirmation of Blackwell's tracking prowess. "He's reading the land, not our footprints," Takoda explained, noticing which passes would be navigable, which routes offer concealment. He studied the distant riders with grudging, professional respect. He's eliminated the obvious paths and chosen the one a skilled woodsman would take. Will they reach the spirit path? Takoda considered this briefly. Eventually, but horses cannot pass through it. They would need to circle around, adding hours. To their pursuit, they continued with renewed urgency, reaching Eagle Rock as the light began to fade from the sky. The formation provided natural shelter, a cave-like hollow beneath the overhanging stone large enough for a small camp. Takoda quickly gathered fallen branches for a carefully shielded fire, while Catherine cleared snow from a sleeping area. "We'll have no fire after dark," Takoda explained as he worked. "Light carries too far in clear mountain air." As they shared a meager meal of jerky and pine nut paste from Takoda's provisions, Catherine found herself studying her companion with undisguised curiosity. In Silver Falls, Takoda had been a distant figure, the half-breed scout who occasionally guided for the territorial government but remained apart from white society. Now responsible for her very survival, he revealed depths of knowledge and character that challenged everything she had been taught about native peoples. "You mentioned your mother taught you about justice crossing boundaries," she said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Was she a healer? Is that why you have her medicine pouch?" Takoda's expression softened slightly at the mention of his mother. She was many blankets woman, respected for her wisdom and healing knowledge. When sickness came to white settlements, she offered remedies when white doctors had none. For this, she was tolerated, but never truly accepted. "And your father?" "Army lieutenant stationed at Fort Laramie," Takoda replied matter-of-factly. "He acknowledged me, arranged for government schooling, believed education would civilize what he saw as my savage half." A hint of bitterness entered his voice. He never understood that wisdom doesn't belong exclusively to people who build permanent structures and write on paper. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen the same blindness in territorial politics. Men making decisions about lands and peoples they've barely encountered, convinced of their superiority despite their ignorance." Takoda regarded her with renewed interest. Unusual perspective for a governor's daughter. "My mother's influence," Catherine explained. "She believed true governance required understanding all who inhabited the territory, not just those who voted or paid taxes." She smiled sadly. "My father once shared that vision, before politics and pragmatism tempered his idealism." Their conversation continued as darkness enveloped the mountains, each sharing perspectives from their vastly different worlds, yet finding unexpected common ground. When Takoda extinguished their small fire, they settled beneath shared blankets for warmth, the stunning canopy of stars providing the only illumination. "Dawn comes early," Takoda advised as they prepared for sleep. "The descent requires focus and strength. Rest while you can." Catherine nodded, though her mind remained active despite physical exhaustion. "Takoda," she said after a moment, "when we reach the trading post and contact my father, what will you do?" The question hung in the darkness between them. Finally, Takoda responded, his deep voice thoughtful. "Continue hunting those responsible for Swift Elk's murder. The Blackwell gang is merely the weapon. I seek the hand that wields it." "Then our purposes align," Catherine observed. "I, too, need to uncover who orchestrated this conspiracy within my father's government." "Perhaps," Takoda acknowledged, "though your father's justice and mine may look very different." With this sobering thought, they lapsed into silence. Eventually, Catherine drifted into exhausted sleep, while Takoda maintained vigilant watch over their mountain sanctuary. Miles away, in a prosperous Silver Falls residence, William Hayes sat in his wood-paneled study, swirling brandy in a crystal glass as he contemplated a telegram that had arrived hours earlier. The message was brief but concerning. "Package delivery delayed by weather. Alternate route required. Confirmed meeting at original location remains viable." Hayes wrote a careful response, encoded in the business terminology they had established for such communications. As he sealed the envelope, a knock came at his study door. "Enter," he called, quickly tucking the telegram into his desk drawer. His manservant appeared, expression carefully neutral. "Governor Hollister's secretary is here to see you, sir. Most urgent," he says. Hayes composed his features into a mask of concerned citizenship. "Show him in immediately. How dreadful this business with Miss Hollister is. I've been beside myself with worry." Fletcher entered moments later, his typically immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Collar slightly askew, hair uncombed, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Mr. Hayes," he began without preamble, "the governor requests your presence at an emergency meeting of his closest advisors. We've received information about Miss Catherine that requires immediate action." "Of course, anything I can do," Hayes responded with perfectly modulated concern. "What information has come to light?" Fletcher hesitated, studying Hayes with unexpected intensity. "Perhaps best discussed in the governor's presence. The meeting convenes at midnight." After Fletcher departed, Hayes returned to his brandy, mind calculating rapidly. Either they had genuinely received new intelligence about Catherine's whereabouts, or, more concerning, someone had begun connecting him to the Blackwell gang. Either possibility required immediate countermeasures. He crossed to a small wall safe, concealed behind a painting, removing a loaded derringer and a leather pouch containing gold coins. Precautions, nothing more, but Hayes hadn't built his empire by ignoring his instincts. Something had changed in the investigation's dynamics, and he needed to be prepared. Dawn found Takoda and Catherine beginning their precarious descent from Eagle Rock. The eastern face dropped nearly 1,000 feet through a series of limestone ledges and narrow defiles, requiring careful navigation even in ideal conditions. With snow and ice complicating every movement, the journey demanded absolute concentration. "Step only where I step," Takoda instructed as they began. "Test each foothold before putting your weight on it. The snow conceals ice beneath." They moved, methodically, securing handholds before advancing, occasionally using the rope from Takoda's pack to negotiate particularly treacherous sections. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, Catherine found the descent oddly exhilarating. Each successful passage built confidence. Each overcome obstacle validated her capabilities beyond the protected world of the governor's mansion. They had descended perhaps halfway when disaster nearly struck. Catherine had just transferred her weight to a seemingly solid ledge when the snow-covered stone shifted beneath her foot. With a sickening lurch, the entire section broke away, leaving her dangling from one hand with 100-foot drop beneath. Takoda reacted instantly, lunging, to grasp her wrist as her fingers began to slip. For one terrifying moment, they balanced between safety and catastrophe. Catherine suspended over the abyss, Takoda himself precariously positioned on the narrow trail. With remarkable strength, he pulled her upward until she could grasp a secure handhold. They remained frozen for several heartbeats, the only sound their ragged breathing and the distant echo of the fallen rock striking the canyon floor. "Thank you," Catherine managed when she could speak again. Takoda nodded once, his dark eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "We continue," he said simply, though his voice carried a new note of respect. More carefully now, they reached the canyon floor by mid-morning, both exhausted from the mental and physical demands of the descent. The valley before them offered easier travel, a snow-covered forest where pines and firs created a natural canopy that had prevented the deepest drifts from forming. As they paused at the forest's edge to adjust their course, a faint sound drifted through the crisp mountain air, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoing off canyon walls. Takoda immediately pulled Catherine into the shelter of the trees, his expression grave. "They've reached Eagle Rock," he stated, calculating rapidly. "Found our campsite. How far behind us? 3 hours, perhaps 4. The descent will slow them, but once in the valley, they'll move faster than we can on foot." Catherine processed this sobering information. Options? Takoda's gaze swept the valley before them, weighing possibilities against growing threat. "We cannot outrun mounted pursuers on open ground. We must use the land itself against them." He pointed toward where the valley narrowed between two sheer rock faces about a mile ahead. "There, a bottleneck they must pass through." Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. "An ambush." Takoda nodded grimly. "We cannot avoid confrontation forever. Better to choose the ground than be hunted like deer." They moved through the forest with renewed purpose, Catherine following Takoda's lead in erasing signs of their passage where possible. Within an hour, they reached the narrow passage Takoda had identified, a natural choke point where the valley constricted between towering cliffs. "The people once hunted buffalo here," Takoda explained as they surveyed the location. "Driving them into this passage where hunters waited." "And now we're setting a trap for different prey," Catherine observed, examining the rifle she carried with newfound determination. Takoda studied her face, noting the transformation that hardship had wrought, not breaking her spirit but tempering it, revealing a core of steel beneath her civilized exterior. "You understand what this means," he said, not phrasing it as a question. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I watched them murder Deputy Haskell in cold blood. They would have delivered me to unknown fate for political gain. Yes, I understand. Perfectly." Something like approval flickered in Takoda's eyes before he turned to examine the terrain with tactical precision. "I will position above," he decided, pointing to a rock shelf overlooking the passage. "You here, behind this fallen tree. When they enter the passage, I will take the first shot. You fire only if necessary, only at those who threaten you directly." As they prepared their positions, securing routes for potential retreat and clearing firing lines, Takoda paused to share a final thought. "Whatever happens," he said with quiet intensity, "do not allow yourself to be recaptured. Better to retreat into the forest alone than return to their hands." Catherine nodded solemnly, understanding all he left unsaid. "I won't be taken again." With positions established and strategy agreed upon, they settled into the tense quiet of waiting. The mountain silence enveloped them, a deceptive tranquility soon to be shattered by the approaching confrontation. In this moment of calm before violence erupted, both recognized that their journey had irrevocably altered them, forging an unlikely alliance into something more profound. A shared commitment to justice that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. Midday light filtered through pine boughs, casting dappled patterns on the snow as silence stretched across the valley. Catherine remained motionless behind the fallen tree, rifle ready, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. From her position, she could see the narrow passage where the valley constricted, a natural funnel that would force their pursuers into vulnerable formation. Takoda had vanished into the rocks above, becoming so completely part of the landscape that even knowing his approximate location, Catherine could no longer distinguish him from the surrounding terrain. The Cheyenne scout possessed an ability to blend with nature that transcended mere camouflage. He seemed to commune with the land itself, reading and becoming one with its rhythms. The first warning came not from sight, but sound. The distant jingle of tack and creak of saddle leather carrying through the crystalline mountain air. Catherine tightened her grip on the rifle, steadying her breathing as Takoda had instructed. Moments later, movement appeared at the valley's far end. Riders, emerging from the tree line in single file. Through the rifle's iron sights, Catherine counted 5 men. Jesse Blackwell led, followed by Reeves and 3 others. Their faces were grim with cold and determination as they followed the subtle signs Takoda had deliberately left, just enough to maintain their confidence without revealing the trap ahead. The Outlaws approached cautiously, Blackwell occasionally dismounting to examine the ground before proceeding. Despite his evident tracking skill, he failed to detect the ambush waiting in the narrow passage, a testament to Takoda's superior woodcraft rather than any lack of ability on Blackwell's part. Catherine held her position as the riders entered. The passage, the canyon walls rising on either side to create a perfect killing ground. When the last man had entered the bottleneck, a bird call sounded from the rocks above, Takoda's signal. The crack of his rifle shattered the mountain silence. The last rider in line jerked backward, toppling from his saddle as his horse reared in panic. Before the others could react, a second shot struck another outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. Chaos erupted as the remaining men scrambled for cover, horses whinnying and bucking in terror. Blackwell maintained his composure, firing systematically at the ridge where Takoda's shots had originated while shouting orders to his men. "Circle behind! Find the high ground!" he commanded, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Catherine remained hidden, knowing that revealing her position too soon would surrender their tactical advantage. She watched as one outlaw, the man called Wheeler, broke from cover and sprinted toward a path leading to the ridge. If he reached that position, he would flank Takoda and potentially trap him between attackers. Taking careful aim, as her father had taught her years before, Catherine squeezed the trigger. Her shot went wide, striking rock near Wheeler's head, but succeeding in driving him back to cover. Now aware of a second shooter, Blackwell redirected his strategy. "We're surrounded," he shouted to his men. "Reeves, watch the tree line. Wheeler, keep their heads down." Gunfire intensified as both sides exchanged shots, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Catherine reloaded with cold, numb fingers, calculating remaining ammunition. 3 rounds in the rifle, plus 7 more in her pocket. Not enough for a prolonged engagement. A movement to her right caught her attention. Reeves had used the distraction to circle through the trees and was now approaching her position from behind. Catherine swiveled, bringing her rifle to bear, but hesitated a crucial second when she realized Reeves was using a wounded horse as partial cover. That moment's hesitation nearly proved fatal. Reeves spotted her movement and fired, his bullet splintering wood inches from Catherine's head. She ducked down as a second shot followed, pinning her in position while Reeves continued to advance. From the rocks above, Takoda had his own problems. Wheeler and another outlaw had found paths to higher ground and were systematically working to encircle his position. He fired his last rifle round, striking Wheeler's companion in the leg, then drew his hunting knife and began moving laterally along the ridge, a dangerous gambit to draw fire away from Catherine's increasingly vulnerable position. The strategy worked. Blackwell spotted Takoda's movement and redirected his attention upward, allowing Catherine a precious moment to relocate. She crawled through snow to a new position behind a cluster of boulders, gaining better angle on Reeves, who had momentarily lost sight of her. When he stepped into the open, searching for his target, Catherine took her shot. The bullet caught Reeves in the upper chest, dropping him to his knees. He raised his pistol with faltering strength, managed one wild shot, then collapsed face first into the blood-stained snow. "Reeves is down!" Wheeler shouted from his position. On the slope, Blackwell cursed, reassessing the deteriorating situation. 3 of his men were now dead or incapacitated. Rather than continue a losing battle, he made a tactical decision. "Wheeler, fall back to the horses," he commanded. "We're withdrawing." As the remaining outlaws began a fighting retreat, Takoda seized the opportunity to descend from his precarious position. He moved through the rocks with remarkable agility, rejoining Catherine behind her cover. "They're not surrendering," he observed, checking his pistol. "Just regrouping." Catherine nodded grimly. 2 still mobile, plus Blackwell. "We're nearly out of ammunition." "They don't know that," Takoda replied. "We maintain pressure, force them to keep moving eastward, away from their objective." A sudden cry from the passage entrance halted their planning. A new group of riders had appeared, not outlaws, but a mixed party of cavalry soldiers and civilians, weapons drawn. At their center rode Governor James Hollister himself, his silver hair unmistakable even at distance. "Catherine!" the governor shouted, his voice carrying across the valley. "Who better?" Catherine countered. "You've walked between worlds your entire life. Now both worlds need what you've learned on that journey." He fell silent, considering possibilities that had never before seemed attainable. "And what of the governor's daughter?" he finally asked, his dark eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "Does she return to her proper society now that the adventure has ended?" Catherine smiled, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes for the first time since their ordeal began. "I think the governor's daughter has discovered that proper society has too narrow a definition of what's valuable and meaningful." She took his hand gently, mindful of his injuries. "Some journeys change us too profoundly to simply return to where we began." 2 months later, a small gathering assembled on the eastern portico of the governor's mansion. Though modestly attended, the group represented a remarkable cross-section of territorial society. Government officials stood alongside Cheyenne representatives, including Far Eagle. Catherine, elegant in a simple blue dress, watched with pride as her father administered the oath of office to Takoda, now recovered from his wounds and standing tall in clothing that blended traditional Cheyenne elements with formal territorial attire. "Do you, Takoda, swear to uphold the principles of justice and fair dealing between all peoples of this territory?" Governor Hollister asked, concluding the formal oath. "I do," Takoda responded clearly, "for all who call this land home." After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Takoda and Catherine found a quiet moment alone on the mansion's side veranda. The spring air carried the scent of blooming wildflowers, and in the distance, the mountains where they had forged. Their unlikely bond stood bathed in golden afternoon light. "Liaison Takoda," Catherine said with a teasing smile. "It suits you." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually solemn features. "Not as well as it might suit Liaison Takoda and his advisor." "Advisor?" Catherine raised an eyebrow inquiringly. "Someone who understands both worlds," Takoda explained, echoing her earlier words. "Who sees beyond boundaries others cannot cross." He took her hand, his touch conveying what words alone could not express. "The governor has approved my first official journey, a delegation to all Cheyenne bands to establish new frameworks for coexistence. It will require someone with diplomatic skills and knowledge of tribal customs." Catherine's eyes brightened with understanding. "A journey together?" "The first of many," Takoda confirmed, his scarred face softening as he gazed at the woman who had crossed every boundary society had established to stand beside him. If you're willing to travel paths yet unmapped, as they stood together overlooking the territory that had shaped them both, her through privilege and education, him through hardship and divided heritage, Catherine reflected on how their unlikely alliance had transformed not only their individual lives, but potentially the future of the entire territory. Unmapped paths, she repeated thoughtfully, her hand still within his. I can think of no better guide for such a journey. Above them, an eagle soared across the vast Colorado sky, its wings spread wide against the endless blue, a fitting emblem for two souls who had learned to soar beyond the limitations others would impose upon them, finding in each other's differences not division, but strength. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.